In this video, we'll be looking at the best budget Sony APS-C mirrorless cameras for photography, video and live streaming in 2022. Sony make a lot of APS-C cameras at a large range of prices, so knowing which is the best for which type of content can get confusing fast. And if you're looking to get into mirrorless cameras, then in this video we're going to focus on the budget end of this range, looking at the prices and features so that you can make an informed decision. So first up is the Sony A5100. I've been using Sony APS-C cameras for around 5 years now, and the first camera I got was the Sony A5100. The A5100 is at the lower end of the prices we'll look at today. Picking one up new will cost around £450, $450. Now this is about £100 more than I paid for it 5 years ago, and even second hand the prices are still around $300 to $350. This is in part due to the global microprocessor shortage, meaning that the prices of all sorts of electronics are a lot higher at the moment. So hopefully, over the course of 2022, the prices of these type of cameras start coming down a lot second hand. Well, I hope so anyway. So some quick specs. The A5100 can record 1080p video at 60 frames per second and has a 24 megapixel sensor, making it a good all-rounder for video, photography and streaming. It is the smallest camera on this list today, making it a perfect travel camera or to mount on a desk as a live streaming camera. It also has a flip-up 180-degree screen, which is great for vloggers. The XAVC-S video format means that you can get 50 megabits per second data rate, which will provide much higher detail and better highlight control than other video formats such as AVC HD. This alone is a massive plus for video creators, though it is worth mentioning that it doesn't have in-body stabilisation, which means that your footage will look pretty shaky unless you're using a lens with built-in stabilisation, though it is worth mentioning the 16 to 50mm kit lens, which comes as standard with all of the cameras we're going to talk about today, does have stabilisation built in, so that is worth bearing in mind. If the body itself doesn't have stabilisation, you can get that stabilisation with the kit lens. So the A5100 isn't without flaws. It's getting old. It was first released in 2014, it does not support 4K and is prone to overheating when recording video, sometimes as quick as 10 minutes I've heard reports, though for me it overheats after about 20 minutes. It's also missing a 3.5mm audio jack and doesn't have a microphone port, and it also uses a pretty old autofocus system at this point and has no silent shooting, so compared to much more modern cameras you are going to notice some limitations. It isn't perfect, and its new price of about $450 means that it is quite expensive. Hopefully, if the second-hand prices start coming down to what they used to be, which was around $250, then this camera is an amazing entry point into Sony cameras, and it's still easily good enough quality for a lot of uses, such as YouTube and live streaming. I still use mine all these years later, and it's still a great option for YouTube videos and photography alike. And if you'd like to check out a full review of the Sony A5100 in 2022, check out this video here. So next on the list is the most popular Sony APS-C camera ever made, and that is the Sony a6000. And in a lot of ways it's remarkably similar to the Sony A5100. Coming out just a few months before, it shares the same sensor and has most of the same specifications, certainly in terms of video quality and for photography. You're really not going to be able to tell too much difference between these two cameras' performance. So your decision on the best out of these two comes down to the price and physical features. Like the A5100, you should be able to pick one up new for around $450, £450, and second hand for around $300, £300. It has a larger body size compared to the A5100, as it does have an electronic viewfinder, EVF, in addition to the monitor for composing your shots. It also has a shoot mode wheel on the top of the camera, rather than just in the menus, which is very useful if you switch shoot modes often, usually if you're using the camera more for photography. And because of that, I find it's a better photography camera than the A5100 because of these features, as well as other features such as customizable buttons that the A5100 doesn't have. As mentioned, it supports 60 frames per second at 1080p, so if 4K is a deal breaker, then the Sony a6000 won't be a good fit for you. But I do find it more than good enough for video and easy to use for photography with good picture quality. Similar to the Sony A5100, the lack of audio jack and microphone input and the old autofocus system and no silent shooting are disappointing, and it shows that this camera really is showing its age. It also doesn't have the touch to focus that the Sony A5100 has, or a flip-up screen for vlogging, which is another downside. The A6000 is definitely showing its age, but if you can get one second-hand at a good price, the flexibility that it gives, especially paired with a quality E-Mount lens, makes this a great all-rounder. And you'll be pleasantly surprised with the quality of the photos and videos that it provides, especially in comparison to something like a smartphone. And before we get onto the next camera, if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. It helps me out a lot. So next up is the Sony A6300. Almost identical in dimensions to the A6000, the A6300 is a couple of years newer compared to the A6000, coming out in 2016. And because of this, it's fixed some of the issues found with the older cameras. You should be able to find a Sony A6300 for around $450, £450 used, though getting hold of one new at the moment seems to be quite difficult and will be more expensive than that. The plus points is that it does have 4K video at up to 30 frames per second and 1080p at 120 frames per second. It has a microphone port present, which wasn't on the Sony A5100 or A6000, and it also has many more autofocus points, making the autofocus faster and more accurate. A downside is, as I mentioned, picking one up new is very difficult, or very expensive, more expensive than it should be. So second-hand is the main way to go with this camera, but its more up-to-date specifications of 4K video, as well as picture profiles, including the flat S-Log2 and S-Log3 gamma curves, means that the A6300 should be a serious consideration for those focusing more on video. It's also worth mentioning that it doesn't have a flip-up screen for vlogging like the A5100. So overall, the Sony A6300 I think is for slightly more serious video users who don't mind picking up one of these cameras second hand. It's comparable in price to the first two are new if you don't mind getting it second hand, but you'll find it a more robust performer for video. And next up, we're going to talk about the Sony A6100. Stick with me, there's a lot of similar names, but they are all slightly different. Again, it's similar in size to the A6000 and the A6300, making this another purely feature and specs-based decision. And don't be fooled by the lower number of A6100 versus the A6300. The Sony A6100 is 3 years newer compared to the A6300, coming out in 2019, so we're getting much closer to present day. The naming is basically because it is the official replacement for the A6000. New, they will cost around £750, $750, so quite a lot more expensive than the others. I'm moving to what I would call is the top end of budget. Maybe for you it isn't budget anymore, that's kind of intermediary or even second camera price as you're upgrading from your first camera. And you might be able to pick one up for about $650, but this is if you are taking things a little bit more seriously. So what makes it stand out from the cheaper options to justify that higher price? It has animal eye autofocus tracking, which means that it has much more accurate autofocus, being able to track an animal's eye and keep it in focus even when it's moving around. Basically means that the autofocus is much sharper and much quicker. It has a flip-up screen, similar to the A5100, great for vloggers, which is a plus point compared to the A6300, and it's also the first camera on this list to not have its video recording length capped at 30 minutes. Of course you can start another video straight away, but if you need continuous recording, then the A6100 is a better option in that regard. Though a downside is that it doesn't offer the more professional picture profiles like the A6300 did with its S-Log picture profiles, so if you're a primarily video-focused user, this will be a downside. If you're looking for a brand new camera that has lots of features without breaking the bank, the A6100 is a great option, especially for photography. It has things such as the shoot mode wheel on the top and extra customizable buttons. So I do find that the A6100 is probably slightly more skewed towards photography use, though the video performance is still very good with that 4K video. Again, it has a 24 megapixel sensor, same as all the other cameras here. They all have very similar sensors, so you know that you're going to get pretty good photos and videos from all of these cameras. And that takes us to the last camera we're going to talk about today, and it's the only one not from the alpha range of Sony cameras, which is the Sony ZV-E10. This is the newest camera on this list, coming out in 2021. Brand new, it costs, similar to the A6100, around £750, $750 new. As this camera is so new, there's very little second-hand market, and if you do find one, it's probably not going to be much cheaper. making it the most expensive camera we're looking at today. And it is technically from Sony's vlogging range, hence the different naming convention. It is a successor to the Sony ZV-E10, which wasn't an E-mount lens system camera. But this one is. It has the same E-mount system as all the other cameras on this list, so they can share lenses, and like the others, has a 24.3 megapixel sensor, making this camera in reality very similar to the others on this list. I think if I'd been doing the naming convention for it, I would have named it something like the Sony A5500, for example. And the reason I say that is because it's somewhere in between the A5100 and the A6000 in terms of form factor. It doesn't have an electronic viewfinder or shoot mode wheel like the A5100, instead replaced with a more prominent video record button and a better microphone on the top. This camera is definitely more focused on video. It has a flip round screen, and it supports 4K video at up to 30 frames per second and 1080p at 120 frames per second. Very similar to the Sony A6100 and the A6300 performance. Where it differs from the Sony A6100 is that it does have those picture profiles such as S-Log and Cine, making it a much more feature-rich video for video creators and vloggers. Now this is the camera I personally use for the majority of my videos. I'm using it to record this video here. The 4K is very crisp and clear, and primarily as a video creator, its focus on video can make it very appealing. And even if you're not planning on uploading 4K, even recording in 4K and downsampling to 1080p will look a lot more crisp than just recording in 1080p, which is always worth bearing in mind if you want the highest quality videos possible. The lack of electronic viewfinder is clearly a downside, especially when it comes to shooting in bright situations, as is the lack of shoot mode wheel on the top, making this camera a bit less practical for adjusting your settings and composing your shots quickly, which I find you need to use more when you are using it for photography. Also, there is an issue with the camera's rolling shutter, which in basic terms makes your videos look very wobbly when recording video and moving the camera around at the same time. Now this really isn't great, especially for a newer camera which is marketed at vloggers. Hopefully this is something that they can fix in the future though, but it is worth bearing in mind. So we've looked through 5 options of Sony mirrorless APS-C size cameras here, and we haven't covered all the stats in detail as this would have been a very long video. So which camera should you buy? Well, in my opinion, you should only buy the camera that is right for your needs. The Sony a6000 is a great all-rounder and is my budget pick for photography. If you're slightly more focused on video, then I would go with the Sony a5100, as it is cheap and compact, and it has the flip-up screen, means you can get started with vlogging straight away. Just beware of the overheating issue which I mentioned, which can be a problem, especially if you're recording in a hotter country. If 4K is a must, then your decision is between the A6100, the A6300 and the ZV-E10. All more expensive than the first two, but add a lot of newer features which might make it worth it for you. But for a quick decision, if you're favouring photography and have a bit more of a budget, I would go with the Sony a6100. If you can find one at a good price, then the Sony a6300 is a great all-rounder with a bit more of a video focus. But if you've got the budget and you're focusing on video, then the Sony ZV-E10 would be my pick. Of course, all 5 of these cameras are more expensive second-hand than you would expect, but I'm hoping over the next few months prices will start to come down and you start to get much better deals for these cameras second-hand. Are you looking to pick up a budget APS-C camera this year? Let me know which in the comments. But if you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. But until next time, see ya.